Well, friends, we've reached the final chapters of the Soulmates series, Book 2, Chaga and Chai. I hope you have enjoyed this audiobook wherever you may have listened to it, either on my TLC for the Soul podcast or TLC for the Soul YouTube channel. You can also find me in all sorts of other fun places on the interwebs. Links to everything I talk about are always in the notes of the show. Now, we cut to chapter 21, Beach Dreams. Rowan had the rental car agency drop the car at the hotel, and within the hour they were checked out and headed towards the coast as the Garmin led them down forested highways, deep with fir trees and magic within. The mood was silent, as Rowan could only focus on getting home to ward off those scavenger bastards, and Larimar tried to tune into Billy and his whereabouts. The going was slow as the rain started to pelt the large sedan, and Rowan wished he had gotten the four-wheel drive instead. But magical hands were leading them safely and surely to their destination, and nothing was going to get in the way of Larimar being at Proposal Rock Beach at precisely the correct time for divine guidance to step in. They arrived at Nescoin several hours later than expected, as slow driving and steep mountain roads in wet weather took time to maneuver. They were both quite tired when they pulled into the drive of the biggest and highest house on the point. Of course, he would have settled for nothing short of the best, but in reality, this magical home had been in his family for several generations. As Rowan recalled how his father had told the story of bringing his mother, Katerina, to Proposal Rock to make a request that would change both their lives for the better. And from that request, little Rowan was born, and the family took vacations to the home from their Danish villa several times a year to commemorate various family celebrations. The home was richly appointed with decadent treasures of all kinds, and looked down at the Proposal Rock Beach like a steward holding space over the magical lands. Sacred space was everywhere, and Larimar could feel it pulsing around her as she opened the car door and stepped into the sumptuous home. Before she could make it across the threshold, Rowan touched her shoulder, and when she turned, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold. "Only the best for my love," he said, really wanting to stay with her, but being pulled away by this inane company coup. "Thank you, darling," she said, touching his cheek. "I'm famished. Let me see what I can whip up for you before you go. You still have to go?" She was asking out of fear of being alone in such a large house by herself, in a land far away from home and her own hearth. "Yes, and you'll be fine here, darling. It's completely safe and protected. You're almost sequestered from the outside world, if you can sense what I mean," he said, feeling the magical powers of the place himself. She was delighted to open the large commercial refrigerator and see a plethora of delights already prepared. There was a large fruit basket on the counter and a professional-grade espresso machine waiting for her to froth up some drinks. No expense had been spared, and she realized she would be very comfortable there, alone or together. She relaxed as Rowan started a fire in the large fireplace. She heated up several turkey dinners in the convection oven and made them a large frothy chai, since Rowan had a long drive back to the airport. "Oh, how I wish I could just settle down here right now with you," he said, as he walked her upstairs to help her get settled in the huge master suite. "You'll be very comfortable here, and you shouldn't need anything," he said, opening the large veranda doors to the roaring ocean outside. Huge waves pounded the beach, and the area around the Proposal Rock was covered by high tides. "Looks like there's a storm blowing in," he said, pulling logs down to stack in the fireplace. "It's going to get cold, but I had enough firewood delivered to keep us for the next few weeks," he said, lighting the fire and sitting on the edge of the bed to take a deep breath of the salty air blowing in. He stood up and pulled her into a deep embrace, lifting her face up to kiss her deeply on the lips. He had to quell his erection and save his strength for the trip back home to Denmark and the ensuing battle with foreigners. They ate in silence, and he gathered his strength to say goodbye and make the drive back. "I'll be thinking of you, darling," he said, holding her close. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be," he said, feeling her anxiety.
"I've left the number to a family friend," he said, pointing to the fridge. "Don't hesitate to call him if you need anything at all. He'll send someone to help with anything you need," he said, holding her out at arm's length and reveling in her beauty.
"Oh, it's okay, I'll be fine," she said, feeling better about things than she had in the past few hours. She would make the most of her time alone in this magical space, and it even started to sound like fun. They kissed one last time, and he walked silently out the large oak front door and away from all that he had planned so carefully. He really had no idea when he would return, but his intention was to squelch these dealings and be back before Larimar could really miss him. He texted his friend Alejandro and let him know the situation. His soul brother, that he had met on a long vacation in Mexico many moons ago, could always be counted on to help him out when he needed it. Alejandro returned his text to let him know he was on board, and Rowan drove away from the fancy homestead, feeling better about leaving her there alone. It was already getting dark, and Larimar decided on a warm bath before the roaring fire while she watched the ocean waves in the dancing moonlight. She would have all day tomorrow to explore the sacred beach and get her bearings, and she could try to travel to Billy again and see what he was up to. She had absolutely no idea beyond that what would transpire in the next few days, but the looming feeling of change and transformation continued to tug at her heart space. She lay down on the thick duvet, and with the stormy seas pounding outside, she fell into a deep, dream-filled sleep. Chapter 22. The Breakers. Morning awoke to the dusky dawn of a new day, and Larimar sat up in her fluffy bed to look outside at the quelling ocean waves, frothy and foaming from the brisky, tossing about of the storm the night before. The tide was low, and the crested treetops stood out over the sand-covered beachhead. It was said, Rowan had told her, that these trees, now covered in sand, had been around since the days of the Christ, and in tuning into them, she could feel their ancient power. 25 miles away, Billy awoke in his small cabin on Devil's Lake. He had gotten in late the night before, after arriving in Portland and spending the day there visiting friends and checking in on his apothecary shop. All was well, and he had retired to the cabin, enjoying a glass of port and some of the mushrooms he had brought home from the ferry experience. He could feel her power in them, too. Such was the magic in those dales. He wondered where he would be now if Larimar hadn't pulled him away from the fairy lights and back to the real world. It was in times like these that he wished and hoped to be back in a more magical space. He had a sudden hunch to go fishing, and he was drawn to the lands around Neskowin. He knew there was good fishing out at Proposal Rock, so he planned to spend the day there and just get back into the swing of things at home. His life there at the lake was quiet, and he spent his days creating magical items for the apothecary and speaking with clients who wanted one-on-one help with his medicines and potions. He wanted for nothing, and it was his childhood dream to help others and to be able to live a magical life, and he was quite successful at it. The only thing he didn't have was her, and he would wait for as long as it would take to find her for real in the flesh this time. He finished his morning yoga and meditation and packed his fishing kit for the coast. Larimar poured herself a strong coffee and picked up her cell to see a text from Rowan. He had made it home. Exhausted and ready for a fight, he wanted to make sure she was okay. He would try to phone later. Larimar pulled on her thickest sweater and headed outside to the trail that led down to the beach. She didn't have to take much since the house was so close. She could come back for whatever she needed. The sun shone brightly on the water, and she could see that the breakers were high and frothy. There was no one on the beach except for a lone figure far off in the distance who appeared to be fishing. She walked slowly on the sand, touching the tops of ancient trees sticking up out of the earth to greet the day. She walked along the shoreline and let the waves wash between her toes. The water was cold but made her feel alive inside. Her pulse quickened for some reason, and she could see the lone figure put down the fishing pole and start walking her way. Seemed like they were moving pretty quickly now in her direction. And for some reason now she felt to pick up the pace and started almost jogging towards the figure. She could see now it was a man, and she saw him reach down and pick up something from the sand. And then it seemed like he was waving in her direction. Billy picked up the ring that had fallen from his pocket into the sand. He could see the girl figure more closely now, and he felt compelled to wave to her. What in the world, he thought to himself. I feel so strange inside. Amidst the breakers, they both half jogged toward each other, something they couldn't explain pulling them ever closer together, until they were standing right in front of each other. No words could explain or say what they saw in each other's eyes. Here they were, face to face, after a lifetime of dreams and misguided steps. Now destiny and their love had brought them here face to face. It seemed unimaginable. Larimar couldn't believe her eyes. It was Billy, her Billy, right here in front of her, and all the fears about what she would say or do when she saw him faded away. And Billy couldn't believe his eyes. He had known all along that this day would come, but he had never quite fully believed it. He almost didn't know what to do or say next. They stood there in the sunrise, just looking at each other like they had done so many times before in their dreams and visions. "Hi, I'm Billy," he said, feeling a little stupid to be saying it to someone he'd known forever. "And I'm Larimar," she said, with tears streaming down her face. And they stood there as the sun rose up and the breakers crashed around them and the silence took over. They were there, side by side, for what seemed like an eternity. But nothing could have stopped this moment, as guides and angels silently cheered behind the scenes, as Billy took Larimar's hand and knelt down before her. The end. Dun, dun, dun. So I hope you enjoyed this audiobook. I think I've said this before, but all my ebooks are free to read if you want to follow along. Links to those, you can find them at Apple Books, Google Books, Barnes & Nobles, and my Smashword publisher. Some of these books, this particular book is in paperback at Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. And I hope you enjoyed this reading of Chaga and Chai, Soulmates series, book number 2. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.